on his own without the other landowner's signature. So unless you have questions about that second decision, I'm going to go back to that first one real quick and get into that ordinance that Rick mentioned. So as far as time frame and document submittal and that kind of thing go, I'm going to defer to Steve Burton for that. But I would like to just make a few quick points about the applicable ordinance and what is a non-conforming use. So the packet does outline that in May 16th, 2017, a conditional use permit was issued for the PRUD, the barn at Terakee Farms. And then March of 2021, we had a land use code amendment. And that amendment, which is found on page 7 of your packet, there is the language there for that new ordinance. And this is important. This is why I'm going over this. In part C, it says a non-conforming PRUD. The adoption of this ordinance also repeals an ordinance governing the creation of a planned residential unit development, PRUD. A planned residential unit development for which an application was submitted prior to the date specified in previous subsection A of this section is hereby a non-conforming planned residential unit development, provided the county has not adopted new regulations governing a planned residential unit development after this effective date. The non-conforming PRUD section is backed up by state law as well. And state law defines what a non-conforming use is. And this is found in 17-27A-103 of Utah Code. And this says a non-conforming use means a use of land that legally existed before the current land use designation has been maintained continuously since the time the land use ordinance regulation governing the land changed, and because of one or more subsequent land use ordinance changes, does not conform to the regulations.
Excuse me.
That now.
Sorry to ask you a question.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So it appears as though what you've explained is the original approval, as I'm getting mine right, was in May 16th, 2017. And the land use code changed March of 2021. So basically what it did is it changed what was approved in 2017 and made it non-conforming.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the part in state law I was just getting at, that it says, yes, it now doesn't conform to the current
So
regulation.
the question I have is, at that time, when that law was changed, there's a developer out there who thinks they have something was approved. Did the county ever go back to that developer and say, wait a minute, something's changed, you're no longer valid?
That would be a question for the planning staff to answer. As far as procedurally what occurred, what correspondence there was there. I haven't been privy to that. So would you like to have Steve answer that now?
Let's let you finish yours
Okay.
and then we'll open it up for questions.
I just have one question,
Yes,
just
go
to
ahead.
follow that up. Is that okay, Chair? Okay. After the planning, the change in the code, they then let the conditional use die, correct? Or was that before?
So after the change in the code, what they have now is a non-conforming PRUD.
Which they have, I mean, the conditional use is set in time,
Correct.
right? So the time, remind me when they had to come back and.
So they have 1 year. So in the next section down, in 108-12-7 on the same page, page 7, it talks about in the last sentence of that paragraph A there, wherever a non-conforming use has been discontinued for a period of 1 year, such use shall not thereafter be reestablished, and any future use shall be in conformance with the current provisions of the Weber County Land Use Code.
So is it incumbent upon a staff member, planning department, or is it incumbent upon the landowner who's to come forth and follow through on their uses?
So it is incumbent upon if the entity with jurisdiction, in this case Weber County, were to determine that the non-conforming use has expired, which they did, it then becomes the developer's burden to prove that they did not abandon that use or discontinue that use, and that's in state law as well.
Right, okay,
becomes
that's what
their-
I wanted to
Their
clarify.
burden
Thank
to
you.
say, no, we did not. That didn't
So,
expire.
so the developer had 1 year under the prior approval and that lapsed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so.
Yes, they did not use the conditional use,
Under,
Right.
in that year timeframe?
right?
Correct,
And that's incumbent upon them,
right.
so.
Can I ask a question on what you just told me?
Yes,
Okay, so to make sure I understand. What I heard you say is the clock started ticking on the development that was changed in March of 2021.
No.
no, so
It was May of 21?
it was May of twenty
Okay,
twenty,
May of 21.
right,
Okay, so
May 11th, 2021.
then it's in, what I heard you say is, and please correct me if I'm wrong. Understand, what I heard you say, it's incumbent that developer prove that they haven't discontinued.
Correct. If the jurisdiction, Weaver County in this case, determines that their conditional use permit has expired, then the burden is on the developer to prove that, no, this is how it didn't expire. This is how we continue
This
to
is
use
what
it.
I've done. These are the
Yes.
things I've done during this time frame. Prove that it wasn't discontinued.
Correct. That is correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
So in here on page 6, it says the original conditional use permit was May 16th of 2017.
Correct.
When did so apparently they were doing something, but then it expired because of 1 year of non-use or non-action?
Correct. So in May 11th of 2021, they did record what is considered to be phase 1 of the 79 units that they were allotted. And that consisted of 36 residential units that they did record. And after that, we have a 1 year lapse in time where nothing was recorded or brought to the county for recording.
So does that void then the 36 unit?
No, the 36 unit is still valid and good.
Okay,
It's everything
so it was
after
beyond that.
Yep, it's that 1 year after that, those 36 units have been recorded. That the county is missing any applications or any documents to be recorded or plats for that development. We have nothing. So that's the 1 year time frame after those 36.
Okay, so in order to validate or to prove that the use hasn't been discontinued, there has to be something filed with the county.
Well, so here's the thing. Now, I read the state code that said a non-conforming use means a use of land that has been maintained continuously since the time the land use ordinance regulation governing the land changed, or there's some more details there that does not conform to the regulations that now govern the use of the land. So what we don't know is what does it mean to be maintained continuously? And the ombudsman's office, the property rights ombudsman's office, they give what they can consider to be the definition of continuously maintained. And I can read that if you want that, because it might be helpful. So
That's
From-
kind of the crux of the issue.
so a use must be continuously, this is from the ombudsman's office. Utah code doesn't define it. They just say it has to be continuously maintained. Ombudsman's office says, okay, here's what continuously maintained means based off of case law. And they say a use must be continuously maintained in order to qualify for non-conforming status. This means that a use must be operated without interruption or at least on a regularly reoccurring basis. Each situation is evaluated individually, but a brief interruption in a use is usually not considered abandonment.
Thank you.
So it's something better than nothing. As far as a definition goes, for what does it mean to be continuously maintained?
But then what does brief mean?
And so, yep,
And
that's,
what? Words are everything.
they are. So, but, so for my purposes here, and before I turn it over to Steve, what I'm getting at is we have a non-conforming PRUD. And in May 11th, 2021, which we mentioned earlier, that's when those 36 residential units were recorded, what equates to phase 1 of this 79 units. And it's that year following from May 11th, 2021 to May 11th, 2022, that the county didn't have anything to indicate to us that there was any use or otherwise of that property. And then it was in July 2022, so a couple months after their deadline, when the applicant came and inquired about doing phase 2.
Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you. When you say applicant, it's my understanding there's two parties involved. And part of it is the signature that in the original application, the original conditional use, that there were two owners. And that part of the problem here is that one of the owners refuses to sign to help reestablish. And so it is, what does that playing in here? How does that play in here? So if you've got a conditional use that is signed by two parties, that's the law, that's it. And if one party won't play anymore, then
I don't know that the second party won't sign the
Okay.
appeal. I don't know. I just know that the appeal was submitted from only one of the landowners.
okay, then maybe I misread that.
Right. And so I don't know the details, and I don't know if planning knows as to whether the other party won't sign or whether one party just signed without the other.
So when I didn't read refuses, did I interpret that on my own, misinterpret that?
I don't recall seeing,
What I read is that the one party that didn't sign owns the common ground, but the developer owns the rest of the property, and that's why the appeal came from the developer. That's what I
Correct.
understand.
right, without the owner who owns the common area signing.
Okay, maybe this is a better question for planning, because I think there's something there that we're not addressing. And I just want to know if that has legal bearing on the decision that's been made, if there's not two signers.
As far as the legal part of it, no, the
Okay.
one party that did sign makes a valid appeal.
Okay, so it's
That you-
sufficient.
Yes, it is
Okay.
sufficient for purposes of you making a determination as the Board of Adjustment.
Okay,
You can do that because the one party that did submit the appeal can do so lawfully, and they did it legally. and it's
okay,
a-
that's
So
my
While
question.
you're,
Okay.
while you're still here, at the top of page 8, third paragraph down, it says, since the time that planning division informed the owners, they would both need to sign the appeal. Planning division's legal counsel advised us to move forward regardless. So
Yes, that
that's
was me.
basically your, okay, that's your
Okay.
opinion. And that's where you're saying one can.
That's
Correct.
why that it was even addressed was it's a little bit confusing. It's like, it's almost suggests that was a problem. So I wanted
Right.
to clarify that.
And that's
Okay.
why for us, the county and the planning department, it's a moot point.
Okay.
We
that's
have,
what you said in
we
the
don't have
beginning.
any issues with the fact that one party submitted this appeal without the signature of the other.
Okay, good.
Okay,
All right. Thank you. Now, Steve Burton.
Hello, board members. It's good to be with you. Did you have specific questions for me at this point?
Why don't you do your presentation and then we'll play off of. what you're
I'm
saying.
sure we'll find something to ask.
Sure. So Liam actually explained in trying to explain and I think answer some of your questions, went over pretty much everything I'm going to go over. My intent was just to let you know what we did as a planning staff, which was regarding the decision that's being appealed right now. We as planners, so on July 19th, 2022, the planning office informed the owners of the barn at Terakee Farm subdivision that their conditional use permit expired.
And what date was that, Steve?
It was July 19th, 2022.
So the notification was that it was expired, not that it will, but that it has.
Yeah, and we
Thank
have no under our own code, and I don't believe under any state codes do we have any obligation to inform a developer of an application expiring. It's as Liam stated, it's on the owner to understand the laws and to know when their developments are going to expire. But the reason that we sent that email is because there was they tried to apply on our website, and we said, just so you know, if we see that you're trying to apply, we want to let you know that you actually expired for the reasons that Liam stated, because it was considered a non-conforming use that was discontinued for a period of a year.
That was a question I had asked earlier. So based on what you just told me, please correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption is that between when they got May 11th of 2021, you saw for a 1-year period, nothing submitted to the planning commission, nothing submitted to the county. Is that true?
That's correct. Nothing submitted at all.
Thank you.
Could I remind everyone to make sure you speak into the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was really what I was going to come up here and explain. The board member Warburton, the reason we mentioned the whole needing 2 signatures was because that was written into the appellant's letter. And we just wanted to address that. So as Liam said, it is a moot point because it's before you now, but the consideration of whether or not it's expired is still before you. That was what I was going to mention. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
I don't have any other questions. Thanks, Steve.
The appellant, as you can imagine, is here as well.
So Brandon, just a question from our legal counsel. The proper procedure for an appeal, do you want to just review that, especially where we have a board member?
Yep.
That's new.
I'd be happy to. I'm going to actually pull up our rules of procedure and just read right off of that, if that's okay.
That'd be great.
That way I don't misspeak.
While he's pulling that up, I just want you to be aware that both property owners are here,
Oh, okay.
so for your information.
Chair, may I ask a question? Sure. Are they both representing themselves, both needing time, or do they have a lawyer that's going to represent both of them?
I think we will leave that up to them to make that determination. I don't know at this time.
Okay,
So,
well, you know everything, so I was.
Rick,
Well, at this time.
well, Brandon's studying that a little bit too. There's 2 owners, but only one of them signed the appeal.
Right. So
Are
who do we
we-
listen to?
Are we bound to listen to both or just the one that filed the appeal? And maybe Brandon can address that.
Yeah, I think you should definitely hear from the person that filed the
Right.
appeal, but I think it would be fair to hear from the other owner as well. Because they both have interest in it.
Okay. Brandon?
Rules do address this. This is under subsection J of our rules of procedure. It's the order of consideration of items. And just before we go into that order, it's a numbered order. The chair has the authority to rearrange this order however you see fit, just to make this more expeditious
Thank you.
or beneficial.
I'll
But
probably do that. No more.
this is more of a template, but you do have
That's-
that option
okay.
to rearrange.
Thank
So
you.
the first is you've introduced the item. If there's any conflicts of interest from the board members, you can suggest that you abstain from any considerations. That may have been something worth addressing at the beginning, but
Hopefully
sounds like
that's,
there is
yeah,
none.
hopefully we've already covered that.
Well, then we
Is
get
there-
to vote on that because you don't necessarily have to recuse yourself, but we get to
Exactly.
decide whether you get to stay.
Yep, it stands on the board member to divulge if there's any conflict of
we'll-
interest.
We'll hear from you.
Staff then makes a presentation on the criteria, standards, and recommendations, which they have done. And then the applicant or applicant's agent presents evidence for the proposal. After that, any opponent or proponent may comment. So that's where someone who's not an applicant or someone who's not with the county may also.
And so even though this is not a public hearing, we have the obligation to
That's
in an appeal.
in
Okay.
our rules of procedures, we have allowed any opponents or
Okay.
proponents to make
Okay.
comments.
Okay.
It's not necessarily public hearing because a public hearing has additional rights attached to it.
Uh-huh.
We're not deeming this a public hearing, but we are saying, if you're in the room, you're opposing or not, you may
Okay.
make comments. Then board members can question staff. Obviously, we've rearranged that a little bit. After the applicant has made their presentation and any opponents and proponents have comment, then the let's see. No, after staff has been questioned, then the applicant can come back up and rebut any new information that has come up. So the applicant essentially has 2 bites at the apple. And then there's the closing of public comment, if applicable, and then concluding comments of the staff or staff summary. I can tell you what steps next at any time if you need me to. And then there's the concluding deliberations of the board members. During this step, we can go into closed session because you'll be acting in a quasi judicial nature. You have the right to go into a closed session so that you can deliberate in peace without the eyes of all the parties on you. There are recording requirements during closed session, so it's not completely behind sealed doors, but it just allows you to have that peace while you deliberate. After that, we make a motion.
Okay, good. Thanks for going over those. So we've actually already covered a couple of these, but I should just ask first, is there any member of the board that's in a conflicting position on this that might need to recuse themselves? Okay, so we're good there. Staff's already made their presentation along with attorney representing staff. So now we'll ask the appeal party to, and since there's two of them, probably the one that signed the actual appeal to present first, if they would like to come up and state your name and address, and then you can present your position on this.
Representing Heritage Land Development, I am Aaron Robertson, living at 5727 Maplewood Drive, Ogden, Utah.
And where are you, Tom? Okay, thank you.
I think, we appreciate the hard work that your staff does, and we do a lot of development in this county. And we have friends here, and I rarely find myself in, we often find ourselves disagreeing on finer points, but usually we can work through them. I think this was a little bit different in how it's come about, but the fact that we're trying to appeal this is not because we think you have a bad staff. I think they do a fabulous job for your county, and I think, and I have high regard for most of them. On this particular issue, I think our conflict really is as you acutely pointed out right at the beginning, the crux of the issue is how are we defining, substantial work on, are we using this subdivision code and as was approved, or are we abandoning? Have we stopped work, or are we trying to move forward? And so from our perspective, nothing could be farther from the truth. We've received our approvals. We recorded the plat, started construction. The original construction and things were actually started by the other property owner, who was in the audience. And he was moving forward best he could, given circumstances that he had at the time. And we were actually under obligation to purchase finished lots. When those were unable to be provided within a timeline, we offered to come in and kind of help out, trying to get this subdivision across the finish line. So to say that, and we do see a recording, that first recording of phase one, that is, we now have curb and gutter, asphalt down, ready for buildings to be built, and we've been moving this whole time trying to get things done. And so from our perspective, there's never been an abandonment of our approval. To our interpretation of this code, and as we look at it, we don't see a separate delineation between a phase one or a phase two. The fact that we are moving on the project as approved as a whole, we have an expectation that when we're ready for our next phase, we'll start our approval process. And by the time and I say approval process, we're not trying to get approval on the subdivision from our mind. It's already been approved. We're just trying to get approved our construction drawings and make sure that everything that was presented originally is still going to function. And so we're working through this process and very surprised to find out that there's a perspective that our second phase suddenly is unable to be built because of a lapsed, because we're non-conforming in the use. While I agree and fully concede that our use is non-conforming based on the change of code, we fail to see how we've stopped for 1 minute to make efforts to try and get this thing built and used. The use is, and the way this kind of plays out in non-conforming, our use is to have a subdivision. And just like you wouldn't, build the top floor before you build the bottom floor, we're building phase one before we build phase two. We're not trying to, you know, and had never heard an interpretation previously. Or is there in your code or the state code that says, even though phase one's approved and built, phase two doesn't qualify? You heard the attorney and we read the same statutes, and there isn't any delineation that we see that says whether we could feasibly understand that our phase two is in question. Had we known or have that been crossed our minds in any way, we would have taken other efforts and tried to preserve our vested rights in the property because we care about those. Right now, we have a half-built subdivision that needs some second accesses and some other things done that show up in phase two, and find ourselves stuttering, you know, to proceed on this. So I'm not my attorney. My attorney was unavailable today. Would I love for him to articulate a little bit better than I have? You bet. But from a developer standpoint who has experience in developing in this county, we have lots of projects in non-conforming zones, but because of the historical vested rights and knowing that we're consistently working on them, we haven't had this problem before. So this came as a very big surprise.
Sir, we need to speak in the microphone, and then you need to
Okay.
address chair first before you ask the question. Chair first.
So basically, what we, here, we'll just come back. So what we try to do is let them, and
Okay.
then I'll actually call for questions.
All right.
And then that way, we're not interrupting during his presentation, because we all have questions for him. So carry on.
And I think that's the, I mean, 2-point per your procedures, I've got another bite at the apple, we can try and come back, but I think the crux of the issue that we have is we haven't read or had articulated in any way something that differentiate the fact that we would have to record the second plat. Your code doesn't say that. The state statute doesn't say you have to record a second plat. We're submitting drawings and having things reviewed by your engineering staff and going through this. We're having inspections done on our project. So the county's consistently been involved. Just because we haven't come in and tried to record a second phase, we don't see where that is a requirement. It's not specified. You did a great job of pointing out, you know, how do we tell what is and isn't? And in neither code does it say recordation of plats is how we identify the fact that we're moving forward, or submitting application for a recordation of plat. It says working, you know, we're trying to build a subdivision.
So, Mr. Robinson, if you'll stay there, we'll open this now for questions to you that maybe you can address. Laura, you had one earlier.
I do, but I'll go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Defer to
You
him.
mentioned during that time period, you're putting in curb and gutter and doing other things. But that was only on phase A.
Correct.
Was there any work done in that 1 year period that you can document that was done on the other phase?
Sure, we did a grubbing and we built up the roads and layouts of the roads with some structural fill that we had access to in our phase two in anticipation of going and building.
You have any
Sure.
other
Can I have
questions?
a-
Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a little confused, so pardon me, but I appreciate your passion on this, and I understand vested rights, and I can appreciate that as well. Your conditional use.
Permit.
The permit, yeah, the conditional use permit. Did it die because it was 1 year or because of a time frame? So by this date, or did the planning staff have to determine on what date? So in my experience with conditional uses, it is a dated document, correct?
Yeah, usually it has a date associated with it, and if it doesn't, the ordinance prevails.
Okay, so then it failed. What's the word I'm looking for? You 2 months behind. How come you didn't come in and re-up on in 2 months? Did you just lose that somewhere? Was it just a high, did you just forget? Did you just pour whatever? Planning? I mean, what's going on there? Because there's 2 months that you could have come in and maybe, and even if it was, at that point, if he had re-upped it within the time frame, then would it have been grandfathered in, even though the code had changed? Yes. Okay, there's the answer. It would have been that. So it was incumbent upon you to do the paperwork.
You're making that statement.
I'm asking a question.
No, you just said.
I
it's
did.
Incumbent upon you to
Yes.
do the paperwork.
Yes. Is that
You're-
true or not true?
It's not our understanding that that's what it's incumbent upon. We think it's incumbent upon us to maintain, trying to develop the property, which we've been doing.
Okay, so there's
So
two things
the
going on.
Approval, if you look at the approval that we have originally,
Mhm.
okay, it's for 79 lots that we have in 2 phases. So that's our approval. And so to say you're approved for your first phase, but not your second phase, it doesn't say that anywhere.
Okay, let's talk about the conditional use.
Okay.
Okay, just that, where you have a non-conforming use, just that alone. Does that have an end date, an expiration date? Did that have an expiration date on it?
It has an expiration.
Yes. Okay, did you address that before it expired? That's all I want to know.
In our minds, yes, absolutely we did. That's why we were out there building subdivision.
No. Did you come in and reapply for a new conditional use permit?
Why would I need to do that? My first one hasn't expired.
Did you not understand that before it expired, you needed to come, did he need to come in and reapply? I'm missing something
So
here.
we've got Mr. Burton, you're back at the podium for a minute.
Our opinion is that it wouldn't have expired if he would have submitted a phase, if he would have recorded a phase within a year.
Okay, so there was no date on, he can't be held responsible for not re-upping by a date, right? So it wasn't going to expire by a date. It was all planned on whether he was doing something with the property or not, if he was in
No.
progress.
No, I think Steve just said the opposite.
Because they recorded phase 1
Huh?
in May of 2021,
Uh-huh.
there was a date, and it was May of 2022. And because they did not record a plat by that time, it expired.
Was that clearly stated on paperwork? Did you know this?
Back to, we got Mr. Robinson again at the podium.
You're doing great, Rex.
That's inappropriate. Please don't do that again.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
The answer to us is we were unaware that we would need to apply for our phase 2 within a certain time period. It's our understanding, remains our understanding, that as long as we are working based on the original approvals of our 79 units, that we are working on the subdivision, that we are using our
thank
vested
you.
rights.
You answered my question. I have one more question for him.
Okay.
Do you do the same thing with every subdivision? Do you hold the same standards? Can you name right now another subdivision that had to file their plat before they move forward? Is this any different than any other subdivision that you've managed?
No, this is not. We treat everyone the same. If someone were to have an expired conditional use permit and propose to submit a subdivision under that conditional use permit, we would look at the expiration and say whether or not you're expired.
And has that happened to your best knowledge in recent history?
To deem one expired,
Yes.
not that I can think of. A lot of times if we deem them expired, they just kind of say, okay, I'll reapply.
So, Mr.
not
Burton,
that I can
that's kind of the key there. He could have reapplied, except the
Claims he doesn't.
zoning changed during that period of time. And that's why it was so incumbent for them to apply within that 1 year, because they were bound to reapply prior to that zoning change. Had a zoning change not happened, even though he let it expire, he could have reapplied and it would have been okay, but because the zoning had changed, I just want to make sure, I'm not trying to state your position. I want to make sure that is.
One thing I'll point out, there's also under the conditional use chapter, the appellant cites in their letter, there's also expirations in the conditional use chapter, as you can imagine. We don't necessarily want every single conditional use to be
Right,
able to do whatever they want forever. So
right.
there are also provisions under the conditional use chapter that say when a conditional use permit expires. I don't know that to my
Current
recollection-
code prevails.
Correct, but I don't recall a request to ever extend that conditional use permit. I'd be happy to read the conditional use permit expiration code if you'd like me to.
Okay, I have one last question, Sheriff, if it's okay.
Yeah, which one? For Mr. Robinson?
Yes,
Okay, Ms. Robinson, we'll have you-
Representative Agent. Okay, thank you for asking my question, answering my questions. What is the problem? Can you not get a permit at this point? Can you not reapply for a permit that will work, that'll enable you to finish what you want to do? Finish your project?
I think the short answer is no.
So I'd like.
Because of
your
the change in
in
zoning.
zoning.
Okay.
And because our layouts are so very specific to what was approved in the PUD. And even if the county were to adopt some of these new rules and the new zoning requirements out there, which are somewhat more helpful, what we're trying to do is 2-point non-conformity.
So if you were, and it's risky, right? You could go ahead and apply and get turned down and come right back here and say, for these purposes, this is what we've done. Can we have an adjustment? Can we get an exception? So that's a possibility too, but apparently you'd rather go this route.
I think my claims and requests here are much simpler and cleaner than trying to petition for variances within the new zone that's been approved. In our position here, we've been working on the subdivision. We have other subdivisions. We know of others that have subdivisions that have multiple phases, and they're bringing them in and getting the phase recorded on a phase-by-phase basis over time. And this is the first time that we've seen articulated the position that, hey, your phase wasn't within the year of the other phase, therefore you can't do it. In point of fact, maybe we would have done smaller phases had we known that, and had we understood that that was the county's interpretation, because that would extend our time longer.
So, Mr. Robinson, you just have the two phases, is that correct in this? And how many homes were in the second phase or lots?
It's roughly the same size as the first phase.
Okay.
So we're, I think, 46.
Okay. So are there any other questions for
Yeah, I
Mr.
do have
Robinson?
another
Okay,
question.
go ahead.
Okay, so in phase A, you got phase A approved. You talked about putting in curb and gutter. Okay. I'm not familiar enough about the subdivision, but as a developer, were there things that you were required to do, such as sewer lines, water lines, power lines, width of road, access points to main arteries that needed to be approved and that you were working on as a part of phase A that were that size that supported phase B?
Absolutely, yes.
Could you please expand on that and explain what those things are?
Without pulling out the drawings, I couldn't get very, speak authoritatively with exact sizing, but I know that we've upsized my sewer lines and water lines specifically to accommodate for those multiple phases. We could have done, we've upsized our secondary water lines as well within the phase to accommodate those future phases and providing water for the secondary, the open space. Our roads, and we have specific access points. We widen the road. What the traffic study would have stated, created a break in that road width between phase A and phase B. If we didn't have phase B, I couldn't say, but I do know that we widened that road gutter with the expectation of all those units. And so we are not at my minimum line size throughout that subdivision. There's components and parts of that subdivision in phase A, as you've stated, or phase one, that have been upsized to accommodate for phase two.
Thank you.
I might add to that one more thing. I would say our upsize is for phase two and not for future development. I don't have other phases planned. So any upsize that took place with the subdivision was anticipation of phase two.
Okay, any other questions right now? Ms. Robinson, we'll allow you to come back if you need to rebut anything. I'd like to actually call Mr. Burton back to the podium, because I think, and maybe one clarification, on page 14 at the top, it actually says here phase two is 41 residential units. I'm not sure if that got changed somewhere to 43, as you noted, but it does say on page 14, 41. Steve, can you, Mr. Burton's back at the podium, can you again maybe help us to know what changed in the zoning from phase one to phase two, and how did it affect this property? And what, with that change of zoning, what could they have still done?
Sure. I'm actually going to share my screen and show you what the original approval was for. This is the development. Now, you may be a little bit confused. There were some name changes by the developer over a few years. Originally, it was called Terakee Village. When it was platted, it was called, phase one was platted. It's the barn at Terakee Farm. What you're looking at is an overall concept map for the conditional use permit. This is what the developer, had they recorded one phase after another within a year of each other, could have completed and would have been entitled to under the non-conforming PRUD ordinance. As I say in my report, in March of 2021, we changed our PRUD ordinance so that developments like this, they actually wouldn't be able to do a development exactly like this. Our elected officials wanted to see different subdivision layouts, so they adopted different rules. But that, as long as this owner recorded a phase each year, they would have been able to keep their entitlements both under the conditional use permit and under the subdivision ordinance. There's also expiration timelines for the subdivision ordinance that are key. But to answer your question, Chair, this is what the developer could have done had they platted a second phase within a year of.
Within the year,
Yeah.
but under the
Now, what
current
can't they
zoning,
do?
yeah, what can they do under the current zoning?
So that is, I'll just mention the zoning is not really I guess I would say, isn't the issue. It's what can't they do under the PRUD code?
Okay.
The current PRUD code says that you actually can't get approval by conditional use permit. You have to apply for a rezone. So the owner today, under today's codes, would have to apply for a rezone
Okay.
in order to make this work.
Okay, and
And the rezone from,
It would be from Agriculture 1, A1 to the Master Plan Development Overlay Zone.
and I'm just out of curiosity, in their general plan, would that be supported?
Depending on what they ask for, they may ask for something completely different. With this proposal, I would say that the general plan does show this open space as a park, and it does show, actually shows mixed use development. So it would at least support this. It would probably support more dense than this today.
It would actually support more density than this today.
Yes,
Okay, so, well, that's interesting, but that's not the question.
it's not.
I understand what's before us. Okay, so again, I'm a little confused. We seem to be arguing over two different things. Whether or not something has been done and continues to be done qualifies somebody to not reapply by the end date. So if his, why am I having such a hard time? I should have never said that I forget names. So when,
Well, I was just going to say, I have kind of a comparison, but Mr. Burton, maybe you can see if I'm off base. If I get a building permit, and I know this is totally different, but if I get a building permit, it's on me to request an inspection every 6 months. And if I haven't moved to a step to do that, I at least have to submit a letter to the county building department as to what progress I have made. If I fail to do that within that 6 months, my building permit can be expired. That is upon me. It's not upon the county to call me, you forgot, or anything. Is this not like that, to where the developer is required to come in and give it an update report? It doesn't matter whether they've done curb and gutter, sewer, whatever.
That's my question.
need
It's
to
like
come-
one side is saying that, wait, we've been working on it the whole time because you did address that. Right? And you're saying, what I'm seeing is that we've got an end date and they didn't reapply. So which one is, what are we looking at?
What we operate under in the planning office, I'll first say, Member Mumford, I agree with your analogy. I think it's important, because if I have a building permit and let's say I'm putting nails in a wall, maybe I call that progression, but I doubt that the building inspector would call it progression unless he's been there to see that it meets code and done an inspection. So I agree with you that there does need to be steps that where you've got confirmation from the governing entity that things are progressing. I will say what we are operating under is subdivision approvals. And so what we're looking at is, when was the subdivision recorded? And when do you have until to record a new subdivision? And so we do not consider grubbing dirt in phase 2 to be any type of progression of the subdivision, because phase 2 hadn't even been submitted to us to review.
So phase 2 is considered an additional subdivision.
It's a new phase,
Okay.
but it is an additional subdivision.
I mean, the developer might call it a phase, but to the county, it's a new subdivision.
Right. So they may have been doing work out there, but they had not submitted anything in order for that timeline to not lapse. And our codes are clear. You have to record a subdivision, a second phase, within a year of the time you recorded a first phase, or else it expires.
Okay.
I have a question. Where's that? I read here where it talks about being discontinued, but I didn't see anywhere whether it says a 1 year for a subdivision. Where's
So
that?
in my staff report, I specifically am using the non-conforming use chapter that says that we're not talking about subdivisions at that point. We're saying whatever use you are, if you have not continued that use for a period of a year and it's non-conforming, then it's expired and you cannot continue that non-conforming use. But what I was mentioning was, we do operate under our subdivision ordinance, which I think does warrant some consideration. This is the ordinance that was existing at the time that this subdivision received its plat approvals. It says subdivisions with multiple phases must record a new phase within 1 year from the date of the previous phase being recorded until the subdivision is completed, or the plat shall have no validity. One thing I will point out is, we as a county did grant extensions of the subdivision. We're actually not able to have a conditional use permit, but we have granted subdivisions and wanted this project to move forward. But we granted our maximum amount of extensions under the subdivision code and couldn't grant anymore. So it's not like we were trying to withhold extensions.
Good.
So vested rights won't be an issue. Okay.
Thank you, Steve. So
Sure.
Steve, if you'll leave that up, and then we'll ask if the other person who's in favor of this appeal to come up and introduce yourself and maybe share your additional thoughts to Mr. Robinson's.
My name is Brad Blanche, 736 South, 4700 West. I live in West Weaver. I am the author of these PRUDs, this one and another one. I know it intimately and backwards. I want to say full throttle up front. I completely support Heritage in building this development. I started this process in 2017 and got a PRUD approved for this development site. I there were multiple lawsuits. This is family property. There were multiple lawsuits that were filed that we had to work our way through. Steve's been really supportive in the planning office in getting the extensions that we needed to move our way through to keep this thing viable. So it's been a lengthy journey, to say the very least. Today, the way this development is designed, my company retains ownership of the private right-of-ways and the open space, including the bigger open space parcel that you saw. So we went to an extra step on this development to do something unique and different. We reduced the roads from typical 60-foot right-of-ways down to 50-foot right-of-ways. We were able to, with the county's help, to reduce the setbacks on the homes from 30 feet to 20 feet. We have landscape plans in place for the parks. There's a senior center in here. So it's a full development. It's not just a typical subdivision. In saying that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. All these extensions that I obtained were done through the subdivision ordinance. So the reference to the ordinance that Steve just referenced, that you have to record one phase upon another each year, that was not a surprise to anybody. We all knew that. And so I, being so involved in this, I had no idea that they had changed the land use ordinance on top of that, because there have been so many changes that have been made along the way. Having said that, also, I believe what will happen is that I will work closely with Heritage. You know, I'm not sure what to refer to you guys as, commissioner or
We're just board members.
board members, board member Burton. We'll be right back here to you with another application, which is exactly what's designed there. Using the county's overlay ordinance, and I owning all the open space will provide whatever density is needed to achieve that. So in a strange way, I feel like we've kind of wasted 4 months. We could have been doing that all along. But I want to see this project fully come to fruition, because there's been so much time, money, and effort vested into making this a reality. I think it'll be a huge asset to the community. Me owning the roads and the open space parcels, and I'm supportive of doing whatever needs to be done. My humble opinion is it would have been faster just to reapply and be right back here. I totally agree with that. And I think that's, if it comes to that, that's what will happen. The county did change their broader ordinance. These lots typically are quarter-acre lots, so I had to give up a lot of open space to get to that point. The county ordinance now allows third acres. So, you know, selfishly for me, as owning the open space, it's going to require less open space for me to dedicate, and I can do a few other things. I don't really have intention to, though. The open space was supposed to be designed and used under the county's agritourism ordinance, which allows some moderate commercial stuff. But I modeled this after a development in Arizona that has been hugely successful. And so that's where I'm at. I want to see this happen. I understand where you're at. It was just no surprise that we had to record phase to phase.
So, Mr. Bunch, can I just get a clarification from you? Because in what Mr. Burton's has up right now, it says after 1 year from that date, referring to the approval, the plat shall have no validity. Subdivisions with multiple phases must record a new phase within 1 year from the date of the previous phase being recorded until the subdivision is completed. Were you aware of that? Is that what you're saying?
Totally new.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that under that subdivision ordinance, we were granted time extensions for preliminary approval and final approval. We utilized those because of an uncle of mine suing my aunt repeatedly. So we used those, kept extending to get things done. And so just case in point, the PRUD was approved. There were no dates that said when it would expire, as long as I kept moving forward. However, the subdivision ordinance said otherwise. So all my extensions that I got were that I could get 12 months or 18 months. And then ultimately I had to record phase 1 by May 14th, 2021. Bumped right up against that. I recorded it in on May 11th, beat it by 3 days. And so it was known we had to get phase two, not just recorded. The PRUD was approved, true. Each phase we knew had to go through again a preliminary and a final approval process with the planning staff.
Okay.
So, Heritage is a great partner. We want to make this work. I want to see this happen for their benefit and mine. So happy to answer.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Go ahead.
I, for one, very much appreciate your approach, your honesty, your candor. Really appreciate that. I understand what you're saying as far as this would take less time if we just got through it. Our challenge is that we grant exceptions, and that is like a precedence. And so we have to be very, very careful what we tell everybody else that they can do. So it's difficult. And I appreciate your position. Anybody that knows me knows that I would like to make the whole system a whole lot less complicated so you can get on with your business. However, our job here is to grant variances or an exception or whatever it is that we have to do. And yeah, and I really, really appreciate your candor, your honesty.
Can I just offer one additional point?
You bet.
Maybe I'm hoping it's helpful. This local community where these developments, this one and another, are being built, 5 minutes from my 15. It's an area nestled between two areas, one to the north, one to the south, that's been growing a lot. This community hasn't seen any growth. So when I got the PRUD approval in this room, in the overflowing chamber, was full of people. And the 3 county commissioners just let it repeatedly just say the same things over and over and over and over again. So we've gone through the heartache and the rails of being beaten up on getting this done. So I appreciate what you're saying. I'm just hopefully offering a perspective that I hope that with the planning office's help, with the new overlay ordinance, and with the new density credits, we'll get this done one way or the other. But I appreciate what you're saying. I just wish it were easier.
I have no doubt that you will get this done. I have zero doubt at your good intentions and your integrity and honesty. Zero. I will remember you. I have to protect the county. That's my job. That's our job. So,
Mr.
and
Lynch,
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
go ahead.
What I heard you say, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you understood the May 21st deadline and that you snuck in under the wire of getting,
I was under constant pressure for like 3 or 4 years to keep these dates alive because of the pressure I was getting from family and community.
okay,
So I vigilantly knew what the dates were.
okay, so you knew about that date for phase A. You knew about that the clock was ticking, right?
Yeah,
Well, the subdivision where we just read up there was pretty clear that says after you get one phase done, you've got a year to do the next phase. Did you know about that deadline?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I knew about that deadline.
Sure.
So you missed the deadline.
It's a
He's
complicated
answering.
process, and with the developer that's helping me, and they've again been great help. I'm not a developer. This is family property. We, in partnering, are doing the best we can to work our way through this.
Okay,
So to answer your question, did I know? Yeah, I knew. And there was no intention to slip anything in. That was never the.
did you ask for another extension when you knew you were missing your deadline?
I don't believe that we asked for another extension because it was known there wasn't another one.
Thank you.
Mr. Blanch, thank you for your perspective. Unless you have any other things, thank you. Okay, we'll move to, is there anybody here that's a proponent to this appeal tonight that would like to come up to the podium and address that? Okay. Come up if you have a, so When I say a different perspective, that would be in opposition to it or a different perspective. Yeah, different perspective is okay. State your name and address and
Robert Roberts, 4517 West, directly across from this. I've been watching this now for the last 3 summers. Or 5 years, but direct involvement as far as watching the individuals work in the subdivision. And let me just say that you have to make your deadlines, right? And it has been unorganized as observed from day one. It seems like the development has had many, many hiccups. And as a community, and living across the street, living through dust storms, having construction, making things affect those how they are very frustrated. So my hope for you, I'm not saying favor, no, saying make sure they get it right. I applied for solar panel several years. No, I hadn't made that. I did. Real. That's exactly present. Past presidents will prevail. You let things go unchecked. So that's all I have to say.
good. Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Okay, come on up. Just state your name and your address also.
Parslow. I live at 664 South 4700 West, directly north of the Red Farm. I have a couple of questions. If this development has to be reapplied for, the very first time this was granted, there was supposed to be a public utility easement to the north. I didn't see that on the plat. And I'm curious if that is still in place and still will be in place after this is. I don't know.
Okay,
It was part of the original.
okay. Any questions for Mr. Parlow?
Just a statement, that's not germane to our
To our subject here, but
subject here, and so we really can't address that. But I would highly recommend calling the planning office and asking them for direction. And I'm not trying to put you off. It's just that we don't have any information about that. We haven't be asked to consider that. It's not in our purview right now to look at that.
Yeah, okay, that's
Okay.
fine.
It's
This
not
is
really
highly
a bearing.
contested and highly fought.
sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely call.
And so if this gets reapplied for, it's gonna get lost.
I would highly recommend you making a phone call and calling the director himself, making sure that you get your answer.
Thank you, Mr.
Right.
Parlow. Okay, are there any others that would like to address this either in favor or opposed? Okay. Mr. Robinson, would you like to come back up and rebut anything that you've heard, or are you fine?
I might just echo and clarify a couple of things that were stated. One, we have watched the original property owner struggle with this and make every effort to try and get it through. His efforts to do so were sincere and hard fought. Our understanding of what we needed to do to have that second phase, because to a point there isn't an extension, weren't under the old code and the old because they didn't longer apply because PUD terminated. Language that we were familiar with says continue to. And to Mr. Mumford's analogy, if I've got a building permit for the building and I'm having my inspections done and the county's coming up and showing up and making sure things are getting done, that's what we had taken place. That was our expectation. We were watching the clock, we were making sure that we're still, because as we understood the rules that applied at the time, non-conforming, not participating in the same rules as the rest of the subdivision. So that's what we were doing. Secondly, I would say, we're gonna watch Burton. The idea that, you know, we could just reapply and that would have been a faster approach at the time that we have a new overlay that's been recently approved. That wasn't in place then. We've heard a lot of caution from the county to not run in and apply for it because they're not just giving it out willy-nilly. And so based on recommendations and what we're hearing from different staff members, we felt like this was our best option. Especially at the time that it was taken. I don't know that we deviated from that now because of from the county and how it's being applied. Do we want to do something? Will we do something? Sure. Would we like to do what was originally approved and in process of doing?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, and for your additional perspective. Mr. Burton, do you have anything else to add on behalf of the county? Director Rick Grover, do you have anything?
I do not.
Okay. All right. The next item, our next point here that Brandon gave us is the board may adjourn to a closed session to discuss this further. Is there a motion?
I move that we move to a closed session.
Okay, motion made to adjourn to a closed session.
Second motion.
Thank you. All in favor of that?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll adjourn for that. Mr. Brandon Quigley, will you join us for that?
I will, yes.
And so that the members know, he is actually our attorney to guide us. So that's why we invite him. We'll adjourn and then we'll be back after our deliberation. Thank you. Is there a motion that we will reopen this?
Come out of closed meeting.
Oh, yeah, come out of closed session. Is there a motion to come out of the closed session?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? I thank you. Appreciate the time we had to deliberate. I think we went over a lot of information. We appreciate your time and bearing with us. Is there a motion from the board?
Yes. I motion that we deny the appeal for the expiration of the conditional use permit because the burden of proof that continued work on phase 2 was not met by the applicant. The applicant needed to provide evidence of continued work on phase 2 after May 11th, 2021.
Motion made by Joe Passenbaugh. Is there a second to that?
Before I second that, I'd like to make, I would like to
Let me
make,
clarify the motion. May I
Yeah.
clarify this
Okay.
motion? Okay, I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Okay. I motion that we deny the BOA 2022-4 appeal for the conditional use permit because the burden of proof that substantial action on phase 2 was not met by the applicant. The applicant needed to provide evidence of substantial action on phase 2 after May 11th, 2021, which was not provided.
I second that.
Okay, a motion's been made by Joe Passenbaugh, second by Laura Warburton. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And aye. So the motion for an appeal has been denied. The appeal has been denied. Any other business? Rick, anything else from planning?
I do not have anything.
Okay. Anything
Nothing from
else,
me,
Brian?
Chair. Nothing. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody being here. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And aye. Thank you. Steve, can you call Steve out there?